One of the areas I specialize is in risk management. And today I'm going to give you a quick overview of what risk management is and how it can accelerate the outcomes of your business while preventing you from getting knocked back due to a law, rule, or regulation, or even a generic risk in the environment. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. If you're going to think more critically, if you're going to focus on outcomes, you're going to push the envelope of speed. Now, the worst, most detrimental setback is when you identify yet not control for, or take action and not understand the risks that are associated with the activity you're doing. Now, I'm not talking about detailed analysis. In fact, there are a number of risk categories that you can go down and identify. Is there a human resource risk? Is there a financial risk? Is there a risk associated with a law or rule or regulation? You can actually make an inventory of risks that are applicable to the work that you're doing. But that is only part of the solution. Now, I work in a Fortune 100 company, and many of my clients are Fortune 1000. They have large groups of people, and they're relying on front-end staff to take specific steps in a process to solve for a problem. And sometimes, believe it or not, those people take shortcuts. And these shortcuts cause problems down the line. Now, some of these shortcuts are actually optimizations that can improve the effectiveness of the process itself. But then again, if you have 20 people doing the same process 20 different ways, that creates an inherent risk of complexity. So I'm not going to go through the list of risks. It really depends on what you're doing. There's a number of data management risks that are identified in the COSO environment. There's a number IEEE related risk categories. There are risk categories associated with banking. That's not important. You can literally make a list of what are the potential risks for this project and then control for them. The most important part is that you always want to be proactive, preventative. You don't want to sit around and wait till some compliance group comes along and says, oh, by the way, you made these mistakes. You don't want some legal or regulatory group to come in and audit you and say, look, here's the problem. It's like bookkeeping. If you record transactions daily, close out your cash registers, close out your transactions at the end of the day, then at the end of the week, you use the preliminary P&L records for decision making. And then at the end of the month, you reconcile all of the transactions over the month with your bank statements, and then use the finalized P&L there to make decisions again. You're going to be able to make better decisions as you're moving towards quarterly tax payments. You'll have enough money in reserve. You'll have enough understanding of what is owed or what is owed back to you. And again, you can just make decisions. It becomes boring. It becomes routine. It becomes a documented process that from beginning to end achieves for you the results that you're looking for. Now, of course, if you have a process, you've got to own the process. And if you've identified any risks in that process, so in accounting, for example, there is the risk of embezzlement. There's the risk of fraud. There's the risk of recording errors. So the bank statement has missed some transactions, or, the end of the day cash register closes out and it doesn't balance correctly. These are risks that can happen in the environment, and you can develop controls. So you have a process. There'll be steps in the process that are controls that are preventing or detecting one of these risk categories. So at the end of the day, if you're closing out the register, you know the opening balance, you know the closing balance, and you know the number of transactions. You can determine whether or not the register closes out. And if you've determined the register closes out correctly, then you can move forward to some other activity. If it does not, you can correct it now. But ultimately, the risk of somebody's got their hand in the till, the risk of you missing a customer transaction is stopped at the end of the day, rather than being allowed to accumulate in the process itself and become a larger failure as you move towards taxes. So for example, if somebody's skimming transactions and you have unrecorded transactions in the system, you're going to find it in inventory. And when it comes to tax time, you're actually going to underreport your taxes. If you should get an audit, then someone's going to go back through the system and cause a lot of other wear and tear, frustration, and problems that could have been resolved by adding to your process some kind of control for known risk. Now, we can get into discussing what is a control, but again, I just want to give you an overview of risk management because it is a philosophy of proactive preventative. What does that mean? It means we want to do things completely the first time so that we are reducing the probability of other risks being introduced to the system. So you've got a process and you've noticed some ways to optimize it. Well, first off, you got a process and you have a general idea of what the process is, and you've written it down somewhere, like in a procedurals manual, or you have a SIPOC, which is a tool that you use for organizing the inputs and outputs of a particular process. You might have a process narrative. You might have software, whatever it is. It's clearly written down, and when you want to change it, you don't just change it. You have some kind of change management where you propose a change, you look at the potential reduction of risk, the potential improvement of process speed, and then you make a decision to now either test the change or to implement the change, but you've got historic measures to know whether the change was good or not. And for some people, this is very complex. They're like, well, this takes so long. That's why we never get anything done around here. No, we don't get anything done around here because everybody's waiting for somebody to tell them to do something. They don't have an approach or a methodology to go through and find the gaps in their environment so that they can clear those gaps before some kind of authority is paying attention. The best thing you can have happen in an audit is the auditor goes in and finds so many successes, so many things that are congruent with the process you documented, so much evidence that you're actually controlling for this risk that they get bored and move along. Now, you know that in this newsletter, we talk about social and behavioral skills and the psychology of decision making. If an auditor comes to you, they are looking for problems. They come and they are looking for something to be wrong because as soon as they can find something that's wrong, they now have justified the fees that they charge. So I work a lot with KPMG, PricewaterhouseCoopers. There's a whole network of these big accounting firms. They want to find problems. In fact, they're going to nitpick. They're going to say, oh, well, I know that you're closing out the end of the day register, but are you including that in an electronic ledger? No, we fill out this paper and then we scan it. Oh, well, you need an electronic ledger. They're always going to come up with something because they're either a consultant where they're looking for problems to solve. And solving these problems does help you. I'm not saying that they're just doing this to create more work for themselves. But then again, I am saying it sometimes because auditors will come in and they'll try to find the problem. They're going to try to find where you're not matching the process. But if you take a proactive, preventative approach, every time one concern is raised, you're going to go research that concern and see if there are any other tangential concerns. So I'm working on a project right now. They're talking about the Telecommunications Act. It has to do with privacy. And they're talking specifically about address confidentiality. So my recommendation was that, okay, compliance is asking about address confidentiality. We have, and they're talking about one major requirement, but sure as shit, we know there are other major requirements related to the process or the activity of address confidentiality. Now, of the 4 major requirements tied to address confidentiality, only 3 of them are applicable. One of them is what compliance brought up. It is better to go in and address the applicability of all 4, clearly identify which ones are not applicable, clearly identify which ones are applicable, and then make sure you have controls for each so that compliance doesn't have to come back later and say, okay, well, here's the second major requirement. Are you controlling for it? You want to go ahead and shortcut their job and say, oh, great, thanks for mentioning X. Here are 3 things related to X, and here's our position on each. And then now you've refined and improved the process. You've identified these risks proactively, and now you can control for these elements while you're taking action with the work itself. Now, to some people, this just blows their mind. They don't see it as compliance is doing a self-assurance activity or they're just going through a list. And believe me, I know this sounds not demeaning, but basically sometimes people just execute processes route. They say, oh, well, step 1's this, step 2's this. They're so afraid of being proactive or moving something forward that they literally use one not ill thought out process, one process that's the result of experience and activity, but not a developed process. And then they just start reusing it. So it's like going to McDonald's, which I don't go to fast food, but if you go to fast food and you go up to the front desk and you ask to order a sandwich that's not on the menu, the people just stare at you because they only see the buttons in front of them that they can push. They don't know that they don't smile and say, oh, well, that's at another restaurant, but I can offer you this sandwich, which is the equivalent. They don't do that. They take and push the buttons. Now, that makes them very low value in the marketplace, and they can be easily replaced by a kiosk or other automation. In a family-owned restaurant, it's different. Hey, what's the soup of the day? They can provide the soup of the day information. Hey, can I have that steak medium rare, or can I have it fully cooked? Hey, leave it a little bloody. You can have that variation within the larger process because those individuals are not just following a routine. They're not just pushing the buttons and going forward. Now, in a professional environment, there's a lot more at stake than your food coming out undercooked. The more that's at stake is financial, legal, and regulatory. And so if you're not waiting on an authority to find the gap and you're actually periodically reviewing your processes and your controls and maintaining an inventory of risks, you're going to be in a position where you're going to catch things earlier. Now, you can self-identify an issue. You can, fix the issue. God forbid you just fix it. And of course, you're going to have to evidence the fix. Otherwise, when audit finally does come around, you're not going to be able to demonstrate from the beginning of a period to the end of the period that you use the same process. But it doesn't have to be complex. It can be chunks at a time. So the address confidentiality thing, let's just go ahead and address all the risk associated with address confidentiality. We're going to package it up into a clear statement of work. We're going to work on it for a week, and then we're going to close it all out. It's going to allow the compliance group to go ahead and get ahead of their work. It's going to allow the business to have confidence that they're doing the right thing when it comes to that. And there are other little tactics you can use in there to identify your partners and what you expect from those partners. And you can do it all in a way that creates evidence so that if you do get audited, you'll have proof that you're not just winging it. Anyway, we could go on to this one for a long time, but the introduction to risk management from the concept of we have a set of work to get done that has risks is maintain an inventory of those risks, maintain an inventory of your written processes and the controls within those processes that are paired with the risks. Have a proactive approach so that if anybody mentioned, the law changes around X, you go find everything related to that and you just fix it. But again, you package it in such a way that you can do as part of your regular routines and not disrupt the work that's actually on hand. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and this has been about risk management and an approach that is very sometimes I feel like it's unique in the industry, but the top performers are constantly approaching things in a proactive, preventative way. If you have questions about this or anything else we cover in this Inside Strategic Relations podcast, you want to visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com. And by visiting that website, you can simply contact us, and you can actually even fax us at 877-486-8461. If you fax me your questions at 877-486-8461, I will put those at the top of the list, because what I find is when people fax in their questions or write them rather than just slinging an email, that they are the type of people who can understand why it's important to get ahead of problems rather than waiting for the problems to show up. So again, this has been about risk management. My tongue is getting in the way of my lips. Thanks for listening. I'm Justin Hitt from Inside Strategic Relations.